We'll continue where we left off in the last tutorial, where we imported our Mixamo character and situated some of the FBX files to pipe to the T-pose of our character. These are all sourced from Mixamo, so if you don't have this structure, go back to the previous video and make sure that you're here prior to starting this video. So the first thing I want to do here, and actually I believe we got to this point in the last video, was source our pink labeled character here into my my map, my level. So we did that in the last scene, so I'll just push her back here. In fact, I'm going to hide my third person character just so we're not distracted by that. But basically what we're going to try to do here is have her go from an idle position to a running and then back to an idle, and she's going to transition and run to the stairs as well. So we'll build around that animation. So now that we have her in the scene, and I am going to tap E on my keyboard to activate the rotation tool. And previously I was using W for the translate tool, but I'll tap E at this time and just rotate her so that she looks like she's facing the stairs. So great, so that's her beginning position. And I'll come over here. I want to now create a short film or a cutscene or a cinematic. So really that's the idea here. If we were trying to use the third person character to actually have this this character respond to input by the user to change into an idle or a run, we would approach this differently. So this is not the pipeline for that sort of game mechanics, but more of a film or cinematics cutscene type of situation. So great, let's go to our content. I'm going to select that here in my content browser so that I can see it in here. And if you don't have this, it likely is just hidden right here. So let's just jump here, right click and choose new folder. And I'll call this sequences. So there's my folder. I'm going to jump into that at this time and create the sequence in which this cutscene, this cinematic, this film, I'll use film from here on out, this film will create. So I'll right click here, choose animation, and come down to level sequence. Right click, animation, level sequence. It's automatically going to prompt me to name that. So I'll just call this first scene. Oops. And we can change that in a minute. We can also see that there's a little asterisk here indicating that this has not saved. So very similar to our map or our level, anything that we change in there, we do need to save, in order to make that change robust. So we can do that by going to Open Save All, or by using the Save All here, or I'm going to double click in this to jump into the sequencer. I can actually save it inside of the sequencer using this icon right here. So great, so we have it here. You can see after I double click to jump into that sequencer, it is also taking a space next door to the content browser. So it can be hard in some cases to actually click and drag, what we need from inside of here into the sequencer. So very frequently I'll dock a tab here of a second instance of the content browser so I can use that to easily do so. And I'll do that up here at the window, go now to content browser and choose content browser number 2. I already have my content browser number 2 piped into here. Yours might be floating. So you'll just click and drag on the little tab until it lives right there, and then you can just drop it. So great, so now that I have my content browser here, I can, have this open, but it's a little bit harder here. So I typically end up just using this type of navigation and double clicking to dial into where I need to be. So we have an instance of our Vera T-pose, populated from the last tutorial. We can also see her here listed in the world outliner because she's inside of here. So now I'm going to drag that from my world outliner and into my sequencer. And we can see an instance of her that is from in here is tied to the sequence. And we're about to manipulate how she's behaving inside of this world. So I'll expose the transform and the location so we can see all the properties here. Actually, let me let that be closed here a little bit. And we can also see this time sequence, right? So this is my timestamp. If you're coming to me from After Effects or another, film editing program or something like that that has time-based media, this probably already feels very similar to you. If you are coming from After Effects, a sequence is sort of like a composition. So if you want to think of it like that, there is nested compositions, nested sequences as well. If none of that made any sense, that's totally fine. You'll still be able to follow along. So one thing I do want to demonstrate before I get started, the defaults here are not necessarily equivalent to what you see on my screen. So I do work with auto keyframing on, so make sure that that one does have the orange highlight on it. And then I'm also working with the key changed. So we'll auto key things that change as we start to work with the keyframing down here in the compositional sequencer. And then the other thing I want to change here, because I'm targeting film, is 24 frames per second FPS. This was also in sync with how we imported our FBX files back from Mixamo in the first tutorial. So we want to make sure everything is in line. So great. So again, I want her to run from here to there. So I am just going to translate the location here. So position the playhead, adjust the object. I've already adjusted her. She is in her beginning location. And if it does get a little rough to try to, position her exactly where you want her to be from the perspective camera, you can always jump to the top camera. And I have mine unlit at this time, but you could light yours. It likely will be in this scary looking brush wireframe, but you're fine, you'll make it. So we'll right click and just drag around here just to move around so that we can center what we need. And maybe you want it to be like perfectly in the center. So maybe push her right there and then just bring her back in space. And I can see that she's slightly rotated, towards there. So I'll just be a little bit more precise about the rotation. And then I can switch back to the perspective. You'll also notice that there are hotkeys associated with this. So if I wanted to just simply get to the perspective view without having to go up here, I could hold down Alt and tap the G key to get back to that perspective view. And obviously using the, the mouse motion can get me to move around as well. Great, so I have her selected at this time. I am at frame 0. I have positioned and rotated her, so I've adjusted the object. And now I need to lay down a keyframe. So next to this word location, I was trying to say like location and rotation together. I'm confusing myself. That's fine. So we'll lay down a keyframe right there. And then again, my 3 steps to animating. I'll position the playhead, adjust the object, and lay down a keyframe. Now, because I automatically, because I have auto keyframing on, it automatically laid down a keyframe, but I could also hit this little plus key. Maybe I want her to stay here for a little bit, right? Click, right? So I've positioned the playhead, adjust the object. She doesn't need any adjustment. Therefore, it doesn't automatically lay down a keyframe because it doesn't sense any change. So I have to lay down a keyframe. So that's one of the reasons why it can be helpful to just get into that rhythm of position the playhead, adjust the object, lay down a keyframe. Even if you do have the auto keyframe in your favor, your eyes will pop down there just to make sure that it was done. So that's a nice way to make it work for you. All right, so that's fine for now. We're going to be adjusting those as we start to see the animations come in. But just to know that our T-pose is transforming over space. And now we want to bring the animations in so she doesn't look like she's just sort of teleporting or skating across here with her arms out in the air. So let's do that together. So underneath animation, I'm going to click on the plus animation. And I should see both of those green highlights that we did previously, right, imported because they're tied to her T-pose. So I could have multiple animations here, based off of motion capture data that are piped in when I import them. I just select her skeleton, and that's what it's targeting it and allowing it to, be listed here. So I'll start with an idle. And we can see it populate here. And we can already see our first problem here. But no worries, we can simply edit this. So I'm going to expose the transform control because a lot of times you will have things like rotation and location working together. Probably not scale, but who knows, maybe you're working with some shrinking characters or something. So what I want to do here is actually quickly edit this. I'm like, oh, shoot, I don't want her to start running here, start moving. I want her to chill out for a second. And then right around here, she will actually start to run. So very simply, I can simply click and drag this over and let it line up with the end of that idle animation. Right, so now we can see, let me tap F on my keyboard once I have her selected here. And let me get to the other side of her here. And as we can see, so I sort of went on the other side of the composition, but as we can see, she is sticking still, right? And then as soon as she's done, she'll go back into her T-pose and then she'll start to translate. But as you might have guessed, we're just going to add in another animation of the run. So I'll do that up here. So next to that word animation again, and if I expose that, you can see that there's a weight property here. I'll go to animation, choose running. Ooh, did that work? That did not work. Oh, there it is. Okay. Woo. And we can see here that the running is now populated at the base. So now she should idle, and then there will be like sort of a, well, actually it's not too bad. But sometimes there is sort of a pop of a transition, and she'll start running. Let me just move this over. Okay, so she starts running over, but again, we see that she stops running right here and snaps back to her T-pose. So the nice thing about this, because they cycle infinitely, and that's how most of them are built inside of Mixamo, you can simply click and drag this to repeat it over and over and over again. Actually, I just need to repeat it till there because that's where she stops. So let me hit play here because we will, let's do the idle since it's sort of rinse, wash, repeat. So I'll go up to animation again, choose plus animation, and then add in that secondary idle. You could keep this on the existing track to keep it sort of tight there, or you could simply click and drag it down if you want it to be on its own little track. Let me move these so we can see that here. As it is, I'm going to let it live on that first track. And let's play this through. So this will be playing at 24 frames per second. So if we play, she idles, she starts to run. The run obviously looks too fast. Right, she's covering more distance than her body is actually working with. And if you slow it down, you can definitely sense this. So if that's hard for you to see, let's go and take a look at how we might understand this information. And really it's that weight-bearing foot. So notice here, if I get in a little bit, if I get in a little bit closer, we should be able to see this. And I'm going to say unlit at this time just so that we can see it. Well, actually, maybe that will help with the shadow. So notice how her foot, and I'll just maybe like line it up with the very edge here just to exemplify the point. That's a weight-bearing foot. So as you run, that foot does not move. It's bearing all of your weight. So that's why it's very stable and it doesn't move. But as we start to, scrub through here, we can see that by the time she actually leaves that position, she's skated across the floor up to about here. Really, at this time when she's starting to, she's actually physically in the air at this time, but the transition of the weight is going from the left foot, and now it's going to, go over to this weight-bearing foot in just like one more frame or two more frames. So that's really where we're having the problem, that we have this skating feeling. Right? Because it's just animating through this. It's not really paying attention to how far she's going or anything like that. In a game, we can determine how fast she goes. So in this case, what I actually need to do, right, because she's going too fast, she has that skating feeling to her, is I actually need to slow this transition down. So let's see that here. So at 55, she's right there, and her foot is still skating across, even though it should be still. So it looks like we have 55, 56. So it's roughly like 5 frames just for that one. It's off. So let me pull that out here so we can go to about there, and I'll push this one over. And again, we can loop this out, and maybe that will help us here. She's still skating a little bit. You see how it moves. So I'll grab this one and move it out a little bit more. And now it's like a little too much. No problem. So it's a bit of trial and error. And depending on your outcome, that might be actually pretty good for this one. Depending on what you need from this, it might not be worth it to get into this type of granular situation. If you're working more on timing and spacing and composition for something like a pre-visualization, so something that happens during pre-production, just so that everybody's on the same page of where people are and what the the composition is supposed to be, then it's definitely going to not be necessarily worth your time to get in and make sure that that it's a weight-bearing foot and everything like that. So let's try that and see how that feels in space and time. Yeah, so what you should be able to see from this, the run is a little bit better. She sort of stutter steps in the beginning here, but what we find is that the transition is a little bit rough at the end. So she sort of, let's get a little bit closer there. She sort of snaps into that. Let's watch it again closer. So hopefully you can see that. So she's in sort of this pose, and then she's told, hey, you have to idle, right? And she just kind of snaps back into that pose. So it can be a bit of a rough transition, and you could do a couple things to solve this. One is to actually have there be an overlap. So if I were to actually click and drag this up to be in the same track here, and then click and drag it over, you can see that the idle, and I'm going to select this and then just tap plus on my keyboard to zoom in there. You can see that the idle is transitioning over time. So the idle starts at a weight value of 1 and then decreases until it's no longer there, sort of like turning the volume down. And then the run starts at 0 and turns that influence up. This is referred to as the weight. So here we can see at the middle, we're 50-50, and then it goes in favor of the run. So that's something that we can do. We can see that transition happening here. This likely will mess up how she starts to run immediately, because the movement here doesn't happen until then. So we likely will have to pull some of those things back to make that make sense. Okay, so let's move over to the other side here. And of course, because we did that, we're actually eating up some of the time that we had from the running, and it's no longer part of that. So we'll have to drag this out here. And same thing on this end, I'll give it a little bit of a transition here. And let's see how that works, or it doesn't work for this final. And just so that because we're only really looking at this, what I'm going to do is position my playhead here, hit the right bracket key. So on your keyboard, it's sort of underneath the minus key next door to the P key. So that left bracket is what we'll do to have it just sort of start and end here. So the right bracket is the other one that I'll use here. And now as I'm looping through this, it will only play what's between here. If you're coming to me from After Effects, this is similar to the work area. So hitting B or N on your keyboard in After Effects, but here it's the bracket keys. So you can see that the transition is happening too long, or perhaps I need to just bring this out a little bit. Maybe a little bit more. So it's not perfect. Just sort of skating there at the end. So, I encourage you to sort of tinker with it and see what works or what doesn't work for you. And I'm going to extend my timeline out here. And maybe I'll push it just to exemplify the point that we can idle for a bit longer. Maybe she runs to the bottom of the stairs, sort of looks around or whatever. And that's really where we end this, this sequence, right, this cut. So let's move that one back. Right, so this green is the start of the composition, the start of the scene. And let's see how that works. Nice. Not too bad. But you can see very easily how you can, start with a T-pose, begin animating the character, add in some animation, transition them over, and then adjust and refine your animation so that you have a character that's doing exactly what you want to do.